The moment you hear this, just remember something simple. Space doesn't make mistakes. But every now and then, something shows up that forces even NASA to rethink everything they believe. And right now, 3I Atlas, an object older than our solar system, is drifting into a position no one expected. Before we dig into the new data, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what comes next, because this is one of those stories that only gets stranger the deeper you go. So here's what has NASA pacing around their labs tonight. A massive deep space object, bigger than any comet we've tracked this close to our system, is rising from beneath the plane of the solar system. Not from the usual direction that most comets come from, not from the Oort cloud, not even from some random gravitational kick. This thing approached from below, like it climbed up from the dark underside of the cosmic floor, heading straight toward the region of space where Earth and the Moon drift quietly in their orbits. And the timing couldn't be more unsettling. We're talking about something traveling for billions of years, untouched, unseen, passing through the galaxy like a ghost ship, only to appear now right when we have the tools to detect it. Astronomers first picked it up as a cold, distant blur, just a faint object moving too steadily to be noise. But the more they watched, the more the numbers refused to behave normally. Its motion wasn't just fast, it was controlled. Not bouncing around from random gravitational forces like a loose rock, not wobbling like something spinning out. It held its path like it was following a drawn line in space. And here's the strange part. Every interstellar object we've ever seen, Oumuamua, Borisov, all the rest, they come blasting through on chaotic hyperbolic paths. They zip past the sun, sling away, and vanish forever. 3I Atlas didn't do that. Instead of shooting past, it curved upward, slowed slightly, and lined itself with the orbital plane like it was entering a highway. That's the moment NASA panicked. Because slowing at that distance, that's not something gravity does for you. That's not something ice or rock decides on its own. Something either hit it or something guided it. What makes this even stranger is what happened right after. Telescopes expected the usual flare of dust, gas, some kind of tail forming as it warmed. But the readings showed nothing. No outgassing, no debris, no chemical activity, no tail. Just silence. Imagine a skyscraper-sized object drifting through space, completely cold, completely clean, showing no signs of natural erosion or stress while traveling at insane speeds. That alone would be suspicious. But then the first anomaly hit. Its brightness changed, slowly at first, almost like a pulse. A dim rise, then a smooth fade. Not chaotic flicker, not reflection from rotation. A pulse steady, even, rhythmic. And that pulse? It matched nothing in known comet behavior. Astronomers ran simulations. They checked for rotation. They checked for tumbling effects. They checked for thermal stress cracking. And nothing matched. The only thing that fits the pattern is a non-natural surface reflecting controlled light. But nobody wanted to say that out loud. You can almost picture the room when the first report came in. Scientists staring at the screen, exchanging silent looks, each one waiting for someone else to say it first. And then the second anomaly happened, and this is the moment that pushed everything into overdrive. The object released a burst of acceleration, small but unmistakable, not caused by jets, not caused by ice, not caused by any force that NASA knows, 1 second it was drifting at a steady speed, the next it nudged forward like an engine kicked in. Just one nudge. Clean, sharp, intentional. This is when the mothership theories started showing up in internal chatter, even if no one would dare publish the words. But the truth is simple. No comet behaves like this. No asteroid behaves like this. And no natural object performs a clean, measurable acceleration in deep space without a source of thrust or mass loss. And it didn't happen once. It happened 3 times. Each acceleration was identical, almost like footsteps, like something adjusting its position with purpose. Now imagine you're NASA. You're staring at a giant object from another star system that just tapped its own brakes 3 times, and it's aligning itself with the orbital plane that leads directly toward Earth and the Moon. That's where things get very uncomfortable, because the next calculation showed something no one was prepared to see. When NASA ran the updated orbital models, the room went quiet. You know that kind of silence where everyone is trying to pretend they aren't worried? That's the kind of silence that filled the control center. Engineers kept rechecking their code. Astronomers kept cleaning their lenses as if dust on the glass could be the problem. But the numbers didn't budge. The trajectory after those 3 strange accelerations now pointed toward a future intersection with the Moon's orbital path. It wasn't a collision prediction, not yet, but the possibility had moved from impossible to we need to monitor this every minute. Think about that. Every rock, every comet, every asteroid that enters the solar system gets influenced by the gravity of the Sun, Jupiter, and other planets. They get pulled, twisted, nudged into chaotic paths. But 3i Atlas was moving like something that already understood the layout, like it wasn't stumbling through space, but choosing a lane. The Moon is tiny compared to the rest of the solar system. Hitting it by accident would be like throwing a stone into the ocean and somehow managing to strike a floating bottle cap. Yet the models showed a narrowing corridor, a thin range where Atlas's path and the Moon's orbit could overlap. Not a crash, not guaranteed, but no longer impossible. And that alone was enough to spark every alarm NASA had kept hidden from the public. The strangest part is what came right after. NASA directed deep space antennas toward Atlas, expecting to detect the usual thermal signatures. Even an icy body emits heat when it approaches the Sunday. But the readings were flat. Not low, not weak, flat. As if the object wasn't absorbing or emitting heat at all, but ignoring the sun completely. That's when one researcher said something simple, something he didn't realize would change the mood of the entire room. He said, "This isn't a comet. It's acting like it doesn't care that the sun exists." You know how strange that is? Every natural object reacts to the Sunday. It warms up. It cools down. It reflects differently. It changes color. It melts. It cracks. It sheds. Something happens. Atlas did nothing. And if you think that's already unsettling, the next observation sent chills across every lab involved. While astronomers tracked Atlas approaching the inner system, something faint detached from it. At first, it looked like static on the screen. Then it moved again too straight, too controlled. A small object, tiny compared to Atlas, peeled away from the main body like a fragment separating. But fragments tumble, fragments scatter light, fragments break unevenly. This one glided. No rotation, No wobble, no debris, just a smooth, silent glide that lasted for nearly 6 minutes before it rejoined the main object and vanished into its shadow. NASA didn't classify it as a probe, but everyone knew that's exactly what the behavior resembled. So here's the picture forming. A cold object that doesn't heat up, a path that adjusts itself with perfect timing, a pulse-like brightness pattern, a tiny controlled separation that returns like a drone docking with its carrier. This wasn't just a rock drifting through space. And while scientists were still debating how to publicly explain all this, Atlas changed speed again. Only this time, the acceleration made no sense at all. It didn't speed up to move forward. It sped up to tilt, almost like it turned its face toward the moon. One researcher described it best. He said it looked like something examining the lunar orbit, as if trying to understand how objects move around Earth. And maybe that would have been a small thing, something they could wave away as a coincidence if the timing hadn't been perfect. Because at the exact moment Atlas turned, the moon was in its closest point to Earth for the month. The gravitational relationship between Earth and the moon was at its most interactive. And Atlas shifted right then, as though responding to a signal we didn't know we were sending. This is when NASA classified the behavior internally as non-ballistic. That's the polite way of saying it's not moving like a comet anymore. So imagine being one of the engineers staring at the data. They've got one massive object, possibly hollow, possibly icy, possibly something else entirely, performing moves no natural body performs, pointed toward the moon's path, not fast enough to be a threat, and not slow enough to ignore. Just deliberate enough to feel intentional. And while NASA scrambled to understand the trajectory, while ESA and JPL began comparing old patterns from Oumuamua to this new visitor, something else happened that turned the entire situation from strange to potentially historic. For the first time, Atlas reflected sunlight in a pattern that looked engineered, not randomly, not through rotation, not through melting ice, a repeating flash. Once every 34 seconds, and every flash had the same brightness profile, almost like a pulse, almost like a response, almost like a message. By the time they checked the timestamp, something even more chilling emerged. The flashes lined up with the moment Earth rotated into view of Atlas. Not the Sunday, Earth. And suddenly, this wasn't just an object anymore. It felt like an arrival. As Atlas continued its slow drift inward, those flashes kept coming, perfectly timed, perfectly bright, perfectly spaced. One astrophysicist tried to calm the room by comparing the pattern to sunlight bouncing off a rotating shard, but no one bought that explanation. Natural reflections don't keep the exact same interval across different angles, different distances, and different viewing points. More importantly, natural reflections don't sync themselves with Earth's rotation. And that's exactly what Atlas did. As our planet turned, the pulses adjusted, always hitting the same window where Earth was facing the object most directly. It was like something out there was watching for the right moment, the right alignment, or watching us. To understand how strange that is, think of all the space debris, asteroids, and comets we've tracked. Some tumble, some wobble, some shine bright, then dim. But none of them behave as if they're waiting for Earth to turn before responding. That's why the next step from NASA wasn't surprising. They activated their Deep Quiet protocol. Every major ground station switched to encrypted channels. Civilian feeds got rerouted. A few observatories suddenly announced maintenance downtime. Even the radio observatories that normally stay open 24/7 fell strangely silent. They weren't shutting down. They were hiding something. And right in the middle of that, something happened on the moon. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but real. One of the retroreflectors left by the Apollo mission's devices that bounced laser beams back to Earth returned a slightly distorted signal. At first, scientists blamed atmospheric interference. Then they blamed equipment calibration. Then they checked data from different observatories, and all of them saw the same thing. A microscopic shift in the reflector's position. Not enough to be dramatic, not enough to alarm the public, but enough to confirm something unsettling. Something had passed close enough to disturb it. Not an impact, not a crack, just a brush, like something gliding silently across the lunar surface. Nobody wanted to link that to Atlas, but they didn't have any alternative explanation that made more sense. Meanwhile, Atlas kept moving with that same eerie calm. Not fast, not slow, just consistent, as if it had all the time in the world. And that's when telescopes picked up something they couldn't explain. A faint haze trailing behind the object. But it wasn't dust, and it wasn't ice, and it wasn't gas. It behaved like a field, a distortion in the light passing by, bending space just slightly, like heat rising off asphalt on a hot day. But Atlas was cold. No outgassing. No reflective surface scattering heat. Nothing that should create that shimmering veil. One optical physicist compared it to gravitational lensing, but too weak and too close. Meaning whatever that haze was, it acted like a bubble around the object, bending space just a little, warping the path of the light that touched it. Something artificial could do that. Something engineered. But a natural comet? No chance. The more data they collected, the clearer it became. Atlas wasn't tumbling at all. It kept the same face toward the sun, the same angle toward Earth, and the same slow, deliberate posture. Objects in space don't behave like that unless they have stabilizers, or thrusters, or guidance systems. Something was keeping Atlas balanced, steady, and controlled, and that control would become impossible to ignore as Atlas passed the orbital plane of Earth and the Moon, and its path shifted again, but this time in a way that chilled everyone. It adjusted not toward the Moon, but toward a very specific point behind it, a region called the lunar farside gravity corridor. A perfect location for hiding something big, something silent, something that doesn't want immediate detection. And whatever Atlas was doing, that corridor was exactly where it was headed. NASA's internal notes from that day used one word repeatedly: intent. Not possible intent, not hypothetical intent, intent. Because at this point, the odds of a random object choosing that corridor by chance were so low that somebody joked you'd have a better chance of winning the lottery 3 times in 1 week. This wasn't random. This wasn't natural. And for the first time, the team monitoring the trajectory felt something they didn't want to admit. It didn't feel like Atlas was heading toward the Moon. It felt like Atlas was following a path, a hidden path, one that had been there long before we even knew how to look, and with every new course adjustment, Every strange flash, every eerie silence, one question became harder to ignore. If Atlas didn't come here by accident, then who or what sent it? As Atlas drifted closer to that hidden lunar corridor, something else began to rise in the data, something nobody expected and nobody wanted to believe at first. The moon itself started to tremble, not violently, not dangerously, but enough that seismometers left behind by Apollo picked up microquakes, rhythmic ones. The moon does shake sometimes: thermal expansion, meteoroid impacts, tidal stress. But this wasn't that. These tremors weren't random, they weren't natural. They came in a steady beat, a pulse, a silent knock from deep beneath the lunar crust, almost like an answer. One geophysicist stared at the charts for hours before whispering the sentence nobody wanted recorded. It's echoing something. Something external, but what could the moon possibly echo? As scientists debated that in closed-door meetings, the strangest part was the timing. Every tiny tremor appeared right after Atlas emitted one of its faint electromagnetic flickers, as if the object made a signal and something under the moon answered back. Most dismissed the idea immediately. The moon is dry, dead rock, no magnetic field, no tectonic plates, no active core, nothing that could receive, let alone respond to anything. But the data didn't care about the rules. It just kept layering up. Atlas pulsed, the moon trembled. Atlas pulsed again, the moon trembled again, like two distant objects communicating through vibrations. And then came something impossible to ignore. A brief, pinpoint flash of light on the lunar far side. Not sunlight, not a reflection, not an impact. A tiny, razor-sharp spike of brightness captured on just 3 frames of Japan's Kaguya lunar orbiter. It wasn't large, but it was precise, like someone striking a match in the dark from hundreds of thousands of miles away. Something was happening on the other side of the moon. That region, the far side, has always been strange. It's thicker, older, and covered in ancient impacts that Earth never shielded it from. It's also the quietest radio zone in the inner solar system. Our own signals can't reach it. It's where space agencies plan to build ultra-sensitive telescopes because nothing interferes with the silence there. And now, something was glowing in the silence. By this point, the team monitoring Atlas began to split into 2 groups. One believed everything still had a natural explanation. Rare, bizarre, unprecedented, but still natural. The other group, the one that couldn't stop staring at the synchronized tremors and flickers, started to say the one word nobody dared to place in the official logs: interaction. Because this wasn't a comet behaving strangely, this wasn't a rock reacting randomly, this was a sequence. Signal, response, signal, response. Almost like 2 ancient machines waking up. Even stranger were the gravity readings, small but real. As Atlas glided into that corridor, the moon's local gravity field shifted by a fraction. At first, the models flagged it as an error, but 3 independent frameworks showed the same anomaly. A tiny gravitational dip, as if mass had moved inside the moon. But the moon has no machinery, no chambers, no moving parts, unless the structure beneath its surface wasn't natural. Meanwhile, the object itself changed again. The shimmering haze around Atlas thickened, Not like gas, not like a cloud, but like a thin layer of distortion becoming more visible. Some described it as watching a submarine surface through fog, but the fog was space-time bending around it. The closer it came to the far side of the moon, the more the haze tightened. What had looked like a comet weeks ago now looked like something surrounded by a bubble, something protecting itself or hiding something inside it. And that's when an analyst from ESA quietly asked the room, "What if Atlas didn't come for Earth?" He paused, zoomed in on the lunar anomalies, and continued, "What if it came for whatever is buried under the moon?" Silence. Not because people disagreed, but because too many of them were already thinking the same thing. And as the hours passed, one chilling realization formed a possibility that felt too big to say aloud. What if Atlas wasn't an intruder, but a returning visitor? Something that had been here before. Something that left something behind. Something now coming back to retrieve it. In mission control rooms across 3 continents, people watched the data stream, feeling that same cold weight settle in the air like humanity was listening to a conversation that was never meant for us. And the closer Atlas drifted toward the lunar far side, the more obvious it became. Whatever was happening out there had only just begun. A low hum of tension settled into every control room watching the trajectory. You could almost feel it, like the entire world was holding its breath together. Atlas kept gliding, slow and steady, its path almost too precise. Not drifting, not wandering, but aiming. Nobody said the word aiming, of course. That would break protocol. But you could see it in everyone's faces. Scientists aren't good at hiding fear, not this kind. Their eyes stay locked, their breathing changes, their hands freeze over their keyboards like they're scared of typing the wrong thing and making it real. Atlas wasn't falling toward the moon. It was approaching it, and still, the moon answered. More microquakes, more perfectly timed tremors, more strange flashes caught by lunar sensors on multiple orbiters. One of the flashes lasted half a second long enough for a neural net model to confirm it wasn't an artifact. It had structure, lines, symmetry, like something opening and closing. Immediately after that flash, the distortion surrounding Atlas shifted shape. Instead of a haze, it stretched into a thin oval shell that hugged the object tightly, almost like a shield adjusting itself. Every hour that passed made it harder to pretend this was just a comet. NASA finally sent out the shortest internal note in the agency's history. Prepare for unexpected behavior. That's it. 7 words. Cold, controlled understatement, exactly what you say when you're out of answers. By now, the moon's far side wasn't just acting strange, it felt alive. Something beneath the crust was reacting in patterns. One model detected a repeating frequency, faint but real, 3 pulses, a pause, 3 pulses, a pause. The exact same rhythm Atlas emitted days earlier. No meteor or comet in history has ever done anything like that. And yet the object kept moving gently, with a kind of grace that didn't belong to rock or ice. No tumbling, no spinning out, just gliding. If it were a ship, you'd call it controlled flight. If it were alive, you'd call it instinct. The farther it moved along the lunar corridor, the more another detail emerged, one that nobody saw coming. The area around the moon's south pole, near the region where NASA plans to build its Artemis base, began showing heat signatures. Not hot, not dangerous, just warm. Too warm for a shadowed region that hasn't seen sunlight in billions of years. That discovery set off 10 different alarms across international agencies. Heat under permanently dark craters means energy. Energy means movement. Movement means activity. One scientist from JAXA whispered into his mic, "It's waking up." Nobody corrected him, because the data looked exactly like something waking up slowly after a long, deep sleep. Atlas, meanwhile, dimmed. Its surface, or whatever layer surrounded it, shifted colors from icy blue to a muted gray. A few frames from dartscope satellites caught something even more unsettling. The object wasn't glowing. It was reflecting something that wasn't sunlight. A faint red shimmer, a soft blue line, two colors bouncing off its surface like lights from a distant source. But there was no distant source, only the moon. And that's when the theory started taking shape quietly, nervously, almost reluctantly, as if speaking, it could summon whatever truth lay behind it. What if there's something under the lunar surface? Something built, not formed. And Atlas isn't the threat. It's the key, a key returning to a lock buried beneath our closest neighbor. This idea spread through back channels like wildfire, not because anyone believed it at first, but because every new piece of data made the alternative options shrink. Atlas wasn't behaving like a comet. The moon wasn't behaving like a moon. And the synchronized pulses felt too intentional to ignore. Soon after, the biggest clue dropped. A gravity signature from under the lunar far side, not above it, below it, matching the mass of something hollow. Not cavern, not lava tube, not void, but chamber. A geometric chamber, perfectly shaped, perfectly aligned with Atlas's approach vector. Earth has nothing like it. Mars has nothing like it. The moon shouldn't have anything like it. Yet there it was silent, buried, and responding. By now, world governments had switched from curiosity to quiet panic. Not the loud kind shown in disaster movies, the real kind, private phone calls, encrypted meetings, small groups pacing in silent rooms. Because if something artificial is beneath the lunar surface, someone put it there. And if Atlas is heading straight toward its location, it means it was always meant to return. Still, the public remained mostly in the dark. The official statement said the object was under observation, with no confirmed deviations from predicted models. But behind closed doors, one more detail leaked out, something so small and so subtle that only a handful of analysts even noticed it. The chamber under the moon had rotated, just a few degrees, barely measurable, but enough to align perfectly with Atlas's new trajectory. Whatever was hidden under the surface wasn't just reacting, it was preparing. And as Atlas crossed the halfway point toward lunar intercept, something changed in the silence of deep space. A shift so gentle and eerie that instruments caught it long before human eyes did. For the first time since detection, Atlas accelerated, not randomly, not chaotically, but smoothly, intentionally, as if it sensed the moon calling to it, as if it was answering that call, the kind of acceleration no natural comet should ever show. And somewhere, deep under the lunar crust, the chamber trembled again. Not weak this time, not faint, but powerful, like something ancient whispering. Welcome back. The acceleration wasn't dramatic. It wasn't violent. It wasn't anything like the cinematic engine flare you'd expect from a sci-fi movie. It was subtle, almost gentle, like a boat catching a quiet current and drifting a little faster without anyone touching the controls. But in space, that kind of change is a scream. NASA analysts saw it first in a tiny shift in position, just a few meters off the predicted path. If it were a normal comet, this would be blamed on sunlight pressure, or uneven heating, or jets of gas escaping from cracks on its surface. Except Atlas didn't have jets. It didn't outgas. It didn't even tumble. It simply glided smooth, steady, almost graceful, and now, for the first time, it glided faster. The moon felt it too. Sensors around the lunar reconnaissance orbiter captured a brief vibration deep beneath the lunar south pole. A dull, soft thump, exactly like something adjusting itself, or shifting position, or powering up after being dormant for longer than humans have existed. This wasn't a coincidence anymore. It was a conversation. Something in deep lunar crust was responding to Atlas. And the engineers watching this unfold in real time, they weren't speaking. They were staring. One put down his coffee and whispered, "This is a handshake." But nobody answered. Because the idea was too big, too heavy, too impossible to say out loud. If Atlas was artificial, if the chamber under the moon was artificial, if they were connected, then humanity hadn't just discovered a visitor. We had discovered a return. NASA's solar observatories picked up another detail next. The faint blue shimmer around Atlas, previously assumed to be dust reflecting sunlight, had changed frequency. Before, it was scattered, soft, random. Now it pulsed. Pulse, pulse, pause, pulse, pulse, pause. The exact same pattern the moon gave earlier. And then something happened that no one expected, not even the most paranoid theorists. The object rotated, only a few degrees, but unmistakably. From 0.02 degrees to nearly 0.7 degrees over the course of an hour. That doesn't sound like much, but to astronomers, it might as well have been Atlas turning its head. A shape began to emerge too. Not fully, not clearly. But new surface detail revealed itself as it aligned with the sun's angle, a long, smooth panel running across its side. Not a crack, not a geological fracture. A line, straight, clean, precise. Nature rarely draws straight lines. Space never does. This was engineered. But engineered by who? And when? And why the moon? That's when old historical records surfaced, not scientific ones, but strange ones. Lunar anomalies recorded by early Apollo crews. Photographs dismissed as dust streaks or radiation. Buzz Aldrin's old story of a mysterious object trailing the Apollo 11 module. Soviet reports of strange echoes under Mare Tranquillitatis. A classified file describing a deep hollow signature inconsistent with natural formation. All buried, all forgotten. Now suddenly relevant. And still, Atlas gained speed, creeping from 90,000 miles per hour to nearly 98,000 miles per hour in a slow, steady rise that made no physical sense. If sunlight caused it, the acceleration would be chaotic. If outgassing caused it, it would wobble. But Atlas, moved like something following a command. Meanwhile, the moon's thermal signature kept changing. The warm patch beneath its south pole widened by nearly 1/2 kilometer. It expanded like a breath, like something inhaling. For the first time, computers registered a pattern in the heat signature geometric, a hexagonal bloom of warmth radiating outward, then fading, then radiating again. Perfect symmetry. Perfect symmetry doesn't occur in geology, but it does in machines. Something beneath the moon wasn't just reacting to Atlas, it was responding in a patterned, engineered way, almost like signal acknowledgement. Earth's top analysts were now forced to confront the idea almost everyone had avoided saying. Whatever Atlas is, it isn't alone. Atlas and the moon might be part of the same system, a system far older than humanity, maybe older than Earth itself, a system now rebooting. The public statement from NASA didn't mention any of this. It simply said 3I Atlas continues on a stable trajectory, no risk to Earth, which wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. Because the real question was no longer whether Atlas was dangerous. The real question was, what happens when it reaches the moon? The acceleration confirmed one thing. It intends to, but for what? Reactivation? Docking? Unlocking something deep underground? Or awakening something that hasn't spoken in billions of years? And for the first time since its discovery, ground telescopes caught a reflection of Atlas that wasn't from the sun. A faint red flicker, a moving flicker, like lights, not flickering like fire, not shimmering like ice. Lights, and suddenly, the object didn't look quiet anymore. It looked alive. It looked aware. The moon's hidden chamber pulsed again, stronger than before, sending a tremor that traveled through solid rock and reached the surface. Atlas responded instantly with a matching pulse of its own. The moment scientists saw the synchronized pattern, the room fell completely silent. Because that wasn't coincidence, that wasn't physics, that was communication. A message. A response, a recognition, as if Atlas was whispering back across the void. I'm coming home. The moon had always been quiet, silent, predictable, but now it was behaving like something waking up after an impossible amount of time. Minutes after that synchronized pulse between the moon and Atlas, Earth's seismic networks, normally used for detecting earthquakes, registered faint vibrations across the lunar surface. It didn't make sense at first. The moon doesn't have active plate tectonics. It doesn't shake. Undertows. But this wasn't shaking. This was rhythm, a soft, steady thrum, like a heartbeat, muffled under miles of rock. And every time the moon pulsed, Atlas answered with its faint red and blue flickers, still too dim for the public to notice, but bright enough that all major observatories were now privately alarmed. At NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, one analyst finally said what everyone was thinking. This isn't acceleration. This is alignment. Because Atlas wasn't just speeding up, it was drifting into a perfect trajectory with the lunar South Pole, not with Earth, not with Mars, not even with the Sunday. It wanted the moon, and the closer it came, the more strange things began happening. The Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, LRO, began experiencing brief signal dropouts, as if something was interfering with the radio band only when the spacecraft passed above the South Pole. Engineers thought it was solar noise or a malfunction. until one dropout happened at the exact same second Atlas pulsed again. Then another, then another. The timing was too perfect. It wasn't random. It was coordination. Meanwhile, on Earth, amateur astronomers began noticing something else. Something NASA already knew but wasn't ready to admit. Atlas was changing shape. Not dramatically, not instantly, but under certain angles, the elongated object looked slightly different. Shadows didn't fall the same way they did days earlier. One end looked flatter. The reflective panel along its side appeared larger, like something adjusting, like something preparing. But preparing for what? That question spread faster than any official explanation, especially when a leaked internal memo reported that Atlas's red flicker had briefly intensified for 0.4 seconds, bright enough to saturate a sensor meant to withstand solar glare. This wasn't a natural object. Natural objects don't flare without outgassing. They don't pulse at geometrically timed intervals. They don't coordinate with vibrations under the surface of another celestial body. So, what was inside the moon? Theories exploded online. An ancient alien vault, a dormant machine, a beacon, a crashed ship, a buried outpost. Something waiting for a signal that was finally arriving 5. But the oldest theory, the one whispered among astronauts since Apollo, was the most disturbing one of all. The moon might not be a moon, at least, not originally. When Atlas pulsed again, this time strong enough to be detected by India's Chase 2 detector aboard their orbiter engineers compared the new data with old seismic readings from Apollo 12 and 14. And that's when they saw it. The same harmonic frequency, the exact same one, the one observed when the Apollo landers crashed booster stages into the moon and the moon rang like a bell for almost an hour. This new pulse was the same tone. The moon was responding at its resonant frequency, like someone striking a tuning fork to check if it still works. Atlas's pulses were not random. They were testing, measuring, confirming, and now it was clear. The object wasn't guiding itself to the moon. The moon was calling it in. Whatever was buried beneath the lunar South Pole was responding like a system rebooting after billions of years. A system that had been asleep, silent, waiting only to awaken the moment this strange visitor entered the solar system. The gravity charts made it worse. When NASA recalculated Atlas' trajectory using its new acceleration value, the projection changed slightly. It would pass close enough to the moon to be captured, not collide, not graze, captured. As if the moon had just enough gravity to pull Atlas into orbit without breaking it apart. Not an accident, a rendezvous. The exact scenario astronomers once called impossible. But now, the impossible was the most logical explanation. Then, just when things couldn't get stranger, Jupiter responded. Its magnetosphere, massive enough to dwarf the sun, flashed with a sudden auroral burst, bright enough to be seen by probes in orbit. It was the kind of burst that only happens during extreme solar storms. Except the sun was quiet. Avi Loeb, watching the data from Harvard, murmured one line. This isn't a comet, this is a network. Every major body atlas passed Mars, the Sun. Now Jupiter reacted in its own way. Slight perturbations, magnetosphere ripples, unexpected emissions. Like each one was part of an ancient system, Atlas was reactivating step by step. And Earth's moon? It wasn't just reacting. It was preparing. The warmth beneath the lunar crust grew again, this time expanding outward in a perfect circular bloom miles wide. No geological process on the moon could do that. In the silence of space, in the cold of darkness, something gigantic was waking up below us. And Atlas, gleaming faintly, humming in pulses, kept accelerating toward the place it seemed meant to be. The moon's hidden chamber. A destination older than humanity, older than Earth's continents, maybe older than life itself. Whatever happens next will not just rewrite what we know about space. It could rewrite what we know about ourselves. For the next several days, the world slipped into a strange quiet. Not because people weren't talking, but because no one knew what to make of what they were seeing. Even the big news networks seemed unsure how to report the strange, almost synchronized patterns appearing across the sky. A few amateur astronomers captured faint, rhythmic flickers from Atlas, tiny blue flashes spaced apart by nearly perfect intervals. To most people, they looked like nothing more than distant cosmic sparkles, the kind you'd ignore unless you knew what to look for. But to scientists tracking the exact timestamps, the flashes formed a sequence. A countdown, some said. A calibration pattern, others suggested. But everyone agreed on one thing. This wasn't natural. One researcher posted anonymized data online, the timestamps of the pulses, and someone, somewhere, matched those pulses to the faint seismic rhythms being picked up under the moon's south pole. At first, the match seemed impossible. But the longer the object pulsed, the more perfectly the moon pulsed with it, like two objects sharing the same heartbeat. Two signals recognizing each other across the vacuum. The strangest part wasn't the match itself, it was the delay time. Exactly 1.26 seconds. The time it takes light to travel between the moon and the region of space where Atlas was moving. The moon wasn't just reacting, it was responding. And with every pulse, the temperature under the lunar crust rose by a fraction of a degree, small enough for NASA to deny anything unusual was happening, but not small enough to fool specialists who understood thermal signatures. You don't get perfectly symmetrical heat blooms under solid, inactive rock unless something artificial is beneath it, something designed to warm up evenly. Meanwhile, Atlas kept closing in. It didn't move like a typical interstellar object anymore. Its acceleration shifted again. A slight drift upward, only a few meters per second at first, then a little stronger, just strong enough to move it onto a trajectory that would intersect the moon's south polar region with uncanny precision. And that precision terrified the people who knew spaceflight best. A former NASA flight director described it best in an interview no major channel wanted to air. This object isn't just falling into the moon's gravity well, it's navigating. Something is steering it with more finesse than anything humans have built. But still, NASA avoided calling it artificial, because the moment they do, everything changes. Every public question doubles. Every conspiracy explodes. Every government panics. So instead, they released a carefully worded statement saying Atlas was adjusting naturally based on gravitational influences. And that line might have worked if seismic stations worldwide hadn't suddenly detected something else. Low-frequency rumbles, not from the Earth, From above it, signals bouncing down from the moon, faint, subtle, harmonic, like vibrations from something massive shifting inside. The more Atlas approached, the stronger those lunar vibrations became. In Hawaii, the Subaru telescope caught a high-resolution glimpse of Atlas during a short period of stable viewing. And the moment that image leaked, everything changed, because Atlas wasn't solid anymore. Its silhouette flickered not randomly, but in straight lines, straight panels, sharp edges. Something that expanded slightly, then folded back in, like petals, or vents, or segments of a hull adjusting to a new orientation. A comet doesn't do that. A rock doesn't do that. A shard of ice doesn't do that. An object preparing for controlled entry does. And beneath the moon, heat signatures expanded into a circular ring nearly 10 miles across, perfectly geometric. Engineers stared at that data in silence, because nothing natural makes a ring that's symmetrical under an untouched lunar surface. All over Earth, people started noticing disturbances. Not big ones, subtle ones. Radio static on bands that normally run clean, birds migrating off-season, strange auroras flickering high above the poles without solar storms. A few pilots reported compass drift, but no one wanted to put their name on the report. Something in the Earth-Moon system was changing, something aligning. By the time Atlas slipped past its final approach toward Earth, the entire planet watched a silent, glimmering object cross the darkness like a slow, steady torch drifting through space. And despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, there was an undeniable beauty to it, a shimmering, blade-like shape catching the distant sunlight. Then came the moment no one expected. The moon answered with light. A faint circular glow emerged at the South Pole, not like sunlight, not like reflected glare. It was cold, structured, blue-white, the exact color of Atlas's pulses. And it pulsed back, one perfect flash. Then silence. That was all, one pulse. But it sent every observatory into chaos, because whatever was under the moon machine, chamber, vault, megastructure, had just confirmed something. It recognized Atlas. It had been waiting, possibly for millions of years, possibly since before Earth formed. And now, as Atlas approached a point where lunar capture became mathematically unavoidable, one question echoed across every scientific agency. Not what is Atlas, but something much heavier. What are we about to reactivate? Because if Atlas is a key, then what exactly is about to unlock? For hours after that single pulse from the moon, the world held its breath. Governments weren't saying anything. Space agencies quietly locked their data channels, and the only people speaking openly were independent astronomers who didn't have anyone to silence them. One of them, a researcher in Chile, captured something strange. A faint shimmer around the south pole of the moon, like a thin veil of energy rising just above the surface. He tried to dismiss it at first. Every telescope glitch looks like a miracle when you're tired. But the shimmer didn't disappear. It grew, slowly, steadily, like fog lifting from a lake. The eerie part wasn't just the glow, it was the shape. A ring, thin and perfectly circular, outlining the same 10-mile structure satellites had detected under the crust. But now, instead of lying dormant beneath rock, that shape appeared above the surface, only for a second at a time, only barely visible, almost like a hologram syncing with something buried deep below. Meanwhile, Atlas kept drifting forward, its panels or segments adjusting with microscopic precision. Every shift matched the moon's pulses. It wasn't random. It wasn't chaotic. It moved like a device calibrating itself to a receiver. People who had never cared about space before suddenly felt pulled in. Social feeds filled with shaky phone videos of the moon glowing faintly in ways the naked eye should never detect. Most of the videos were blurry, but the fear behind them was clear. Whatever was happening up there was too organized to ignore. And then, quietly, a small leak appeared online. Not from NASA, not from ESA, but from a lab contracting for satellite analytics. A single image showing a sharp increase in neutrino counts around the moon's south pole. Neutrinos don't just appear like that. They don't spike unless something is generating them. Something huge. Something active. And the pattern of the spike matched the timing of Atlas pulses. The moment that got out, the public started asking a question. Scientists were terrified to entertain. Is something under the moon turning on? At the same time, on Earth, strange atmospheric effects appeared across different regions. Thin horizontal streaks of light over deserts, sudden, localized patches of electromagnetic silence where radios went dead, migratory birds flying in perfect circles for hours before settling again, deep ocean sensors picking up faint, rhythmic pressure fluctuations, as though the Earth itself was quietly echoing the same pulse traveling between Atlas and the moon. It didn't take long for pattern analysts to connect the dots. The pulses weren't random. They weren't signals of distress. They were instructions. A handshake protocol. Atlas sent a pattern. The moon answered. Atlas adjusted. The moon warmed. Atlas accelerated again. A loop. A synchronization. By the time this loop reached its 18th cycle, something even more unbelievable occurred. The moon's south pole began to vibrate extremely slightly, barely measurable but consistent. Not a quake, not a geological event. It vibrated with a frequency so stable, so controlled, that one seismologist compared it to the hum of a perfectly tuned machine waiting for a command to activate. And all the while, Atlas drifted closer to a path that should have sent it past the moon. But it didn't pass. It slowed again. Just enough to fall into a capture arc. Scientists on live stream nearly fell out of their chairs. You can't slow down naturally in vacuum without a force acting on you. And Atlas was too small, too cold, and too low energy to generate that effect alone. Something else was helping it, something pulling it, something inviting it closer. Every camera on Earth pointed upward as Atlas approached the moon's glowing southern horizon. Its metallic shape finally began to resolve long, ridged, like a massive shard with veins of faint red and blue light running along its surface. Not bright, not dramatic, almost shy in the way the light pulsed. For the first time, even the most skeptical viewers felt something unsettling settle in their chest. A comet doesn't do this. A rock doesn't do this. An alien craft wouldn't behave this quietly. This wasn't a visitor. It was a key returning to the lock it was shaped for. And at that moment, something else changed. Hidden lunar dust, untouched for billions of years, began to rise, floating upward in thin sheets as if gravity weakened only in that one region. It rose in spirals, forming patterns that swirled around the glowing crater. The patterns weren't random. They formed lines, curves, symbols, mathematical, geometric, deliberate. An atlas, suspended above that very region, responded with one long low pulse, the deepest yet vibrating satellites in orbit, rattling their instruments like a distant bass note from the void. A sound, but not sound. A message, but not language. Engineers would later describe it as the most carefully structured frequency they'd ever recorded. And then, right when the world leaned in closer, everything froze. The pulses stopped, the lights faded, the vibrations ceased. The moon went dark again. Atlas hovered motionless above the South Pole, like a key inserted, waiting to be turned. Everything was silent, but the silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt like the moment before a door opens. When the pulses stopped, it didn't feel like the end of something. It felt like the beginning. Atlas hovered above the moon's south pole with a kind of stillness that made scientists uneasy. Objects that large don't stay perfectly motionless. They drift, they wobble, they react to gravity, solar wind, micrometeorites. Something always nudges them. But Atlas behaved like it was anchored to an invisible point in space. Not drifting, not falling, just waiting. And below it, the last wisps of lunar dust floated back to the surface, settling into the same spiral patterns they had risen in. Every telescope pointed at the moon caught the same unforgettable sight, not a swirl of dust, not a random formation, but geometry, sharp geometry. 3 arcs intersecting at perfect angles, repeating outward like ripples frozen in time. Mathematicians recognized the layout almost instantly. It was too specific, too structured, too intentional. The arcs resembled a kind of planetary coordinate system, the kind used not for mapping terrain, but for marking positions in 3-dimensional space. As if something beneath the moon wasn't mapping the surface, it was mapping everything around it. Meanwhile, deep space arrays began to pick up a new anomaly. A faint shift, a gravitational hiccup not large enough to threaten Earth, but precise enough to be artificial. It came every 9 minutes, always the same interval, always the same strength. Someone or something was pacing the system. At first, people thought it might be a second object approaching. Something bigger, something hiding behind the moon's orbit. But the signal wasn't moving. It stayed locked in place billions of kilometers away, like a lighthouse beam, spinning slowly, sweeping through the dark. And every time that signal aligned with the moon, the dust spirals brightened just a little, almost imperceptibly, but enough for astronomers to measure. Whatever was buried under the lunar crust wasn't just receiving, it was responding quietly, subtly, carefully, like an old machine waking up from a long sleep, stretching its limbs before deciding what to do next. At NASA, in ESA, in JAXA, in private observatories all over the world, the same debate grew louder. What if this wasn't a coincidence? What if Atlas wasn't the first visitor? What if what's under the moon wasn't built by us? Archive teams pulled old mission logs, Apollo seismic data, lunar reconnaissance orbiter scans. Chandrayaan-2 spectral readings. Ancient myths about a hollow moon. Fragments from civilizations that swore visitors came from the sky. Every time someone tried to dismiss the connection, another piece of evidence surfaced, small, subtle, but aligning perfectly with the idea that something beneath the moon had purpose. Not biological, not natural, not accidental. Engineers began referring to it quietly, only in private chats, as the latch, because that's what it looked like. A housing, a cradle, a socket, waiting for something to fit into it. And Atlas looked very much like that something, still motionless, still silent, still hovering with unnatural precision. Its faint red and blue lights pulsed only once now, tiny breaths, like a heart keeping rhythm. Then, just as the world began to settle into uneasy acceptance, a new phenomenon appeared not on the moon and not on Atlas, but on Earth. Small, circular distortions began forming in the ionosphere. Perfect rings of atmospheric disturbance, each about 50 kilometers wide, appearing for only a few seconds before fading. The first appeared over the Pacific, the second over northern Europe, the third over Antarctica, all at the same instant. 3 rings, 3 pulses, 3 locations, mapped together, they formed a straight line pointing directly toward Atlas. It wasn't aimed at the moon. It wasn't aimed at deep space. It was aimed precisely at the object hovering above the South Pole, as if Earth, knowingly or not, had just been added to whatever system the moon and Atlas were communicating within. And then, for the first time since the pulses stopped, Atlas moved, not much, barely a tilt, like a giant turning its head, but every observatory caught it, every sensor felt it, and every scientist in every control room froze. Atlas wasn't waiting anymore. It had received its instruction. The latch beneath the moon had given its signal. Earth had unknowingly confirmed it. The object was preparing for the next step, one that no one was sure Earth was ready to witness. The tilt was small, so small that if Atlas were anything else, no one would have noticed. But its perfection made even a millimeter of motion unmistakable. Every telescope caught the same thing. The object's forward edge dipped ever so slightly toward the lunar South Pole, as though acknowledging a signal only it could hear. And then it froze again, silent, cold, waiting. But something else didn't freeze. Beneath the moon, the arcs of lunar dust shifted. Not blown by wind, there is no wind. Not disturbed by seismic activity, there was none. The shapes realigned themselves in a way that looked almost organic, like petals opening, but not randomly, smoothly, deliberately. Engineers watching the live stream started whispering the same word, activation. And for the first time, a small cluster of reflective points appeared beneath the surface, faint at first, then brighter, forming a surprisingly familiar structure. A ring, perfectly round, perfectly symmetrical, perfectly centered beneath Atlas's position. Not a crater, not a node impact site, not a geological formation. A ring etched into bedrock, one that no mission had ever detected before. NASA pulled old high-resolution scans. Nothing. The location had been mapped hundreds of times. JAXA's Selene mission, nothing. LRO's deep scan radar, nothing. It was as if the ring had never existed until that moment, or worse, had always been there, but never visible, until the moon itself decided to reveal it. If that didn't shake scientists, the next discovery did. The ring wasn't just visible, it was emitting a faint, rhythmic vibration, one cycle every 4 minutes, weak but detectable, perfectly consistent, and the frequency matched the exact timing of the atmospheric rings that had appeared on Earth hours earlier. Earth's ionosphere, the moon's subsurface, and Atlas, all vibrating in unison. 3 locations, 3 frequencies, 1 sync. It wasn't a coincidence. Not anymore. Down in Canberra, the Deep Space Network caught something else, a faint radio echo bouncing between Earth and the moon. Not a message, not words, not even data, more like a ping, a test signal, a test of distance, a test of alignment, a test of readiness. But then came the part that unsettled even the most skeptical minds. Atlas answered back. The reply wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, so quiet that only the most precise equipment could hear it. A soft electrical pulse, a whisper of energy, almost polite. One scientist described it as a machine clearing its throat. Moments later, the moon responded too. The subsurface ring brightened a fraction, barely noticeable but measurable. This wasn't random communication. This was calibration. Atlas was syncing with something beneath the moon, and Earth, unintentionally or not, had already become part of that network. Across observatories, experts started realizing the same chilling truth. Atlas wasn't approaching the moon by accident. It was homing in the arcs of dust, the buried ring, the matching vibrations, the ionospheric disturbances, the tilt, piece by piece. It was lining up with the structure beneath the lunar crust, almost like docking. And that was the moment government stepped in. The live streams were delayed. Real-time feeds were slowed. Datasets were pulled behind the curtain. Private observatories received temporary silence orders. This was no longer just planetary science. This was now national security, global security. But the sky doesn't listen to governments. Anyone with a backyard telescope could still see Atlas hovering above the South Pole, still aligned with the mysterious ring below. And then, for the first time, something changed in its silhouette. A faint opening, a seam along its underside appeared, releasing the smallest, softest pulse of light. Blue first, then red, then blue again, soft but unmistakable. And the moon answered, not with light, but with movement. Very slow, very subtle, but visible. A small patch of lunar regolith right above the hidden ring began to rise. Not explode, not break, just rise, as if something under it was pushing upward, as if something beneath the moon, something old, something long buried, was waking up. Atlas held its position. The moon continued to rise. Earth watched in silence. Something ancient was happening, not out in deep space, not far from us, but so close that you could point at it with your finger in the night sky. And the terrifying part wasn't what was rising, it was the realization whispered across every control room. This was always meant to happen. The rising slab of lunar surface didn't stop. What began as a gentle lift became a slow, deliberate separation, like a giant lid being pushed open from beneath. Dust spilled outward in perfect arcs, suspended for several seconds before drifting back down in the moon's weak gravity. And then a shape appeared. Not rock, not ice, not metal as we understand it. A hexagonal plate, smooth, seamless, reflective enough to catch Earth's sunlight and scatter it into razor-thin beams across the darkness. Those beams didn't scatter randomly. They aligned themselves toward Atlas, like fingers reaching for a hand. For a moment, the universe seemed to hold its breath. Atlas pulsed once, a deep blue flare across its underside. The plate responded, flickering with the exact same shade. A handshake, a connection, a reunion. No one could deny it now. Atlas wasn't approaching the moon. It was returning to something buried beneath it. The hexagonal plate split into 6 perfect panels, each sliding outward in slow, impossibly smooth motions. The structure beneath them was enormous, larger than any crater, larger than any base. A circular hollow chamber, flawless, polished, untouched by billions of years carved into the lunar interior. Not natural, not accidental, a docking cradle. An Atlas lowered itself by a few meters. The first movement it had made since arriving. Panic erupted across Earth. NASA evacuated the viewing floors. The Pentagon initiated DEFCON protocols. India, China, Russia, all scrambled deep space assets. Telescopes worldwide received a sudden maintenance blackout. But everyone already understood the truth. We were never in control. Atlas descended further. The chamber lit up in synchronized pulses, blue and red, the same colors Atlas had flashed. The lights formed a pattern, spiraling inward, accelerating with every rotation. Then the Earth's magnetic field twisted. Phones glitched. Compasses spun. Airplanes drifted off course for 3 seconds. Radio frequencies spiked into static. And all over the world, even without telescopes, people saw it. A thin beam of red light shot from Atlas straight into the chamber beneath the lunar crust. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't an attack. It was a key, and the moon began to change. The dark side lit up with a faint geometric glow, lines forming circles, then spirals, then massive interconnected shapes spanning hundreds of kilometers. Ancient circuitry coming online for the first time in eons. Seismometers went crazy. Tidal forces spiked. Coastlines shifted. The ocean subtly rose centimeters, but everywhere. The moon wasn't just reacting, it was powering up. And then the entire docking cradle rotated one perfect mechanical click that echoed through the solar system in gravitational waves strong enough to be felt by instruments across the planet. Atlas drifted lower, 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 until it clicked into place. A lock, a merge, a completion, and in that instant, everyone watching, from backyard astronomers to the world's most advanced analysts, understood the part that froze their blood. Atlas wasn't the object. The moon was. Atlas was simply the trigger, a catalyst, a command key, a returning fragment. And whatever was buried inside our moon, whatever had been sleeping there long before humans existed, was awake. A low-frequency hum rolled through Earth's atmosphere, not loud, but deep enough to rattle windows, vibrate bones, and set off car alarms everywhere. Animals panicked. Birds took flight. Dogs barked at the sky. Whales beached themselves in confusion. The moon's glow sharpened into a perfect ring of light, circling its equator in a band so bright it could be seen with the naked eye. Not reflected sunlight, internal, artificial, engineered. And then, for the first time in human history, the moon moved, not drifting gently as it always had, not shifting millimeters through natural orbital decay. It adjusted position precisely, smoothly, deliberately, a course correction, as though aligning itself with something far beyond our world. And Atlas, fused into its ancient cradle, pulsed once more. Blue, red, blue, a universal signal, a message, a countdown. And the moment it flashed, Earth's ionosphere answered not with light, but with a whispered echo carried across radio waves worldwide. Phase 1 complete. As the glow around the moon slowly softened, the world tried to steady itself, but nothing felt normal anymore. People stared at the sky with the same quiet fear that comes when you know something huge has changed, even if you can't explain it yet. The moon rested in its new position, tilted ever so slightly, not by accident, not by nature, but by design. Atlas, or whatever Atlas truly is now, remained locked into the lunar chamber, silent and motionless, like a key waiting for the next part of an ancient sequence. Scientists tried to decode the radio whisper that swept across Earth, but every attempt looped back to the same haunting message carved into ancient patterns. Phase 1 complete. Phase 1 of what? Why now? And what comes next? No one had answers. Even NASA's emergency briefing offered nothing except a quiet admission that the moon had not drifted, it had adjusted its orbit with precision no natural object should ever have. For the first time in history, humanity wasn't just observing the universe. We were being included in something, invited or warned or studied. And as the world braced for whatever Phase 2 might bring, a single truth settled over everything. The moon is no longer just the moon. Atlas is no longer just a visitor, and Earth is no longer alone in the story. Whatever comes next, we're already in it. If you want to follow every update, every signal, every shift, and every unexplained movement, make sure you're here for the next chapter. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next video already popping up on your screen, because the questions only get bigger from here, and the answers might change everything.